Your wife was kidnapped from your bed while you were in it. No one believes you. In fact, everybody thinks that you are suspect number one. That's what happened to Aaron Quinn in this episode of Legal Nightmares. Please, thank you for joining us. This is episode 2 of Legal Nightmares. If you like our content, please like, subscribe, comment, share. All that stuff really, really helps out the channel, and we're a brand new channel, so please, we can use all the help that we can get. So let's get into all the juicy details about this. I'm excited. We're doing this episode a little bit differently than the first episode. The first episode, I was basically reading off a teleprompter. And this one, I don't want to do that. So I have some notes over here to my side, and we're going to get into it. I hope you enjoy. So for Aaron Quinn and Denise Huskins, this story starts very interesting. They're laying in bed, they're sleeping, and suddenly they are jolted awake. They hear the sound of the window shattering and footsteps coming down the hall. And before they can even process what's happening, they stated there's a man in their room in a wetsuit. His face is covered, his voice is muffled, and he has night vision goggles. And he's holding a weapon. So, pause for a second. At this point, I don't really know, how would I respond in this situation? For those that don't know about me, I have a background in the military. I was in the Army for 8 years, and I'd like to think that I would react aggressively in this situation. But until it happens, you don't really know. I know that sometimes the dogs have woken me up at night, and I've stayed in bed, and then other times I've jumped out scared and ready to fight. So this is a very interesting thing to happen. Well, Denise and Aaron are ripped out of their bed. Their hands are bound, duct tape over their mouth, and bright light shining in their eye from this person's flashlight. And he speaks to them through a pre-recorded voice on a speaker. This pre-recorded voice tells them, don't scream, don't run, and don't try anything, because if you do, then he's going to end you both. Now, at this point, Aaron and Denise are in shock. So they're not doing anything. They can barely breathe, honestly. They're so terrified. And the intruders grab her, blindfold her, and they actually grab and kidnap Denise. And just like that, she's gone. They leave Aaron on the ground tied up. And I don't know how long it takes for him to get untied or wiggle himself out of his restraints, but eventually he gets himself free and he calls the police. So at this point, he's just been woken up out of nowhere, and his wife has been taken from him by guys in wetsuits. So very interesting thing to happen so far. And he does what any normal person would do in this situation. He calls the police. And the police get there as fast as they possibly can, but when they arrive, it's not what you would imagine happens. So after hours of being in these restraints and finally being able to wiggle himself free and call the police, they come to the neighborhood, and the police are obviously asking questions. They're asking what happened. And the story that Aaron tells them sounds like it's something out of a fiction novel. It sounds like it's from a horror movie. And they obviously don't believe him. And it goes from disbelief to, honestly, them thinking that he's the one that did this or planned this. The investigators start asking Aaron questions like, are you sure that this really happened? Is it possible that you're making this up? Did you have a fight with Denise? Did something else happen between you two that you're not telling us about? And the more details that Aaron gives them, the less that they believe him. Meanwhile, this whole time, Denise is, in fact, actually gone. And they're painting him as the number one suspect. So she's blindfolded, she's restrained, we find out later that she was driven hundreds of miles away to a remote house. And they keep her there, or the person who kidnaps her keeps her there for 2 full days. She is held hostage, she is assaulted, and she's not even sure if she's going to survive. And what I think is really interesting about this story is that it doesn't end the way that you think it would. It doesn't end with the person kidnapping her, ultimately taking her life. Believe it or not, after a couple days, the person who kidnapped her just lets her go. She's released. He drops her off near her parents' house in Southern California, about 400 miles away from where he kidnapped her. She stumbles into safety and she's, assaulted. She's terrified, but she's alive. But the worst part about this is the kidnapping wasn't the worst part of the story. Survival was just the beginning. As she tells her story to people, the law enforcement doesn't believe her either. They actually think that Aaron and Denise were in on the whole thing together, trying to set up some kind of hoax. They call this whole thing a real-life Gone Girl. And I'm not sure if you guys have seen the movie Gone Girl, but it's about a girl that fakes her own disappearance. So they take this, the police, the investigators, the media, they take this story and they freaking run with it. I kind of want you guys to imagine being the victim of both a kidnapping and assault, and then only to be told by the world that it didn't happen and that you made it all up. And the sad thing about this is that I think that this probably happens more often than not. I'm sure there's more times in history where the authorities have made these kinds of allegations. The best part about it is later they are vindicated. For months, the story of Denise and Aaron being the real-life Gone Girl couple, this big hoax, this elaborate scheme, that held for months in the media. CNN ran with it. San Francisco Chronicle actually quoted the police calling it a wild goose chase. And social media piled on mocking them, saying it's a fake kidnapping. And one of the police spokesperson from the Vallejo Police Department actually said it plainly in an interview. He said, "There is no kidnapping. This was a hoax." But behind the scenes, there was other things happening. This kidnapper, while this was all happening, was still out there. And this kidnapper felt froggy again, and he committed the same exact crime. He did it in Dublin, California, about an hour away from Vallejo, the original place of the crime where he kidnapped Denise, and he did it to someone else. And he did the same thing. He kidnapped them and later released the hostage. And when this person came to the police, their story was nearly identical to Aaron's and Denise. The suspect wore goggles. He used zip ties and tied them up. He spoke through a pre-recorded message, and the victims described details that matched Aaron's and Denise's story almost exactly. Now, eventually, the police found the suspect's home, and they searched it. And when they searched it, they found all the evidence they needed. They found the goggles, they found the duct tape, they found stolen property, and then the biggest nail in the coffin here was video footage linking him directly to the kidnapping of Denise. The name of the kidnapper was Matthew Muller. Matthew Muller was a former Marine and a disbarred, Harvard-educated attorney, now acting as a serial predator. So at this point, the FBI had gotten involved, and they started putting together the puzzle pieces and clicking them all into place. And now this hoax, this elaborate scheme that Aaron and Denise had put together was no longer a hoax or a scheme. It was real. The media had to backtrack and say that Denise hadn't lied, they hadn't staged anything, and that they were telling the truth all along. The Washington Post actually published a headline saying Gone Girl case wasn't a hoax after all. And the worst part about this whole backtracking of everything was that the Vallejo Police Department issued a statement that was, in my opinion, just heartless. They said that their earlier statements were regrettable. And that irritates me, because they just said one word, regrettable, as if destroying two people's reputations and credibility can be described with just one single word. So luckily, the Denise and Aaron didn't just let that go. They ended up filing a lawsuit. In court, Matthew Muller pled guilty to kidnapping, sexual assault, and burglary. He was ultimately sentenced to 40 years in prison. So, got him off the streets, super happy about that. But the vindication isn't the same as justice, because Denise and Aaron were still left with their lives completely in ruins. Their credibility was gone. Their reputation was completely shot. Family members had stopped talking to them. They lost their jobs, and the nightmare didn't fade whenever they woke up. They were still living the same nightmare. In fact, Denise actually described it as surviving trauma twice. First, the trauma of the abduction and the kidnapping, and then second being the betrayal of not being believed. So they filed a lawsuit against the Vallejo Police Department. They sued for defamation, they sued for emotional distress, and unfortunately it took years of legal battle, but they did reach a settlement. That settlement was for the amount of $2.5 million. So on paper, I guess you could say that that's a victory, but in reality, in my opinion, no amount of money is going to erase what was taken from them. The question that comes to my mind here is, if the police had listened and if they had acted and believed her, how much of this could have been avoided? I argue that a very large amount of it could have been avoided. For Denise and Aaron, the nightmare never really ended after that night. First, the kidnapping, then not being believed, then painted as the suspects, and then dragged through the media as being hoaxers and the real-life Gone Girl. It's a mess. So I guess it's a good thing that they got the money from that settlement, but it makes you stop to think. If it happened to them, could it happen to you? And I think the answer is yes. I think that if it happened to them, it can happen to anybody. And, I'm going to do a quick plug here. I'm going to try not to be too obnoxious about it. But being that this is a legal channel, I do highly recommend Legal Shield, or prepaid legal services. Could that have helped them in this situation? I think that in the beginning it could have. If they had a lawyer that they could have called immediately that knew them, trusted them, and could fight for them from day one, I argue that a lot of this wouldn't have happened. I think that a lawyer from day one would have saw the defamation coming. I think the lawyer from day one would have seen a lot of the would have been able to stop the investigators and the media and all of this stuff from happening before it got out of control. The problem with most things like this is that getting a lawyer on hand, it's expensive. Lawyers can cost $300, $400, $500, even $1,000 an hour, depending on the lawyer. But with Legal Shield, you get a set amount of hours per year as part of your membership. And it depends on the membership plan that you have. If you want to know more about that, let me know offline. But having had that from the beginning, I think that they would have been in a much better situation, and that a lot of this would not have happened the way that it happened. So that's my plug there. Definitely get you the legal protection that you need, because you never know when you're going to need it. It's just like insurance, right? If you have health insurance, you don't plan to get sick, you don't plan to get hurt, but when you do, it's nice to have health insurance so that you aren't paying tons of money for it, and then you can actually get the help that you need. So same thing with legal protection. I'll wrap this up by saying that this story is actually a documentary on Netflix. It's called American Nightmare. I encourage every single one of you to go out there and check it out. They go into all the nitty-gritty details. You can see footage. You can see lots of footage of the police department and all the things that actually happened, interviews with many of the people involved. It's a very, very good documentary. I highly encourage you to check it out. I don't want to go too long on this video. I try to keep them between 15 and 25 minutes. So I'll post a link to the Netflix in the description. I'll also post a link to Legal Shield in the description as well if you want to get that legal protection that you need. And then, as always, guys, if you would like to support this channel, please like, subscribe, share, and comment if you can. This is a brand new channel. We can use all of the help that we can get. And if you like this version of the episodes better than the me reading off the teleprompter episode, which was episode 1, go check that out if this is the first video that you're seeing. Let me know which one you like more, and I'll keep doing them that way. You know, we're still very early in the channel, so we have a lot of flexibility. And if you have your own legal nightmare that you would like me to feature on the show, comment it below or shoot it to me in a message. I'm happy to feature it on the show. In fact, I would love to feature stories that don't necessarily have the news coverage that something like the Gone Girl hoax might have. So if you have your own story, or if it happened to your family or your friend, you know, I'm happy to take a look at it, and who knows, maybe your story or someone you know's story will be the next one that we feature. So, as always, stay aware, stay protected, and know that your story matters. All right, I'm Brandon Collins. This is Legal Nightmares, and I'll see you on the next episode.